In Indonesia, in the middle of the Surabaya market, the noise of the stalls mixed with the smell of fresh fish when an elderly man held out a crumpled bill to buy a simple piece of bread. The merchant took the money, turned his back, and refused to return the change, loudly saying that beggars don't deserve coins. People around him stopped. The old man lowered his eyes, holding his empty stomach, while the merchant laughed and said, "If you want food, come back when you have real money." Some tourists recorded the scene without knowing that just seconds later, something strange would happen. At the top of the metal stall, a nearly imperceptible vibration ran through the structure, a silent warning that no one understood in that moment, but that would change everything. Before continuing, make sure you're already subscribed and comment from which city you watch. His name was Hassan Wiratmaja, a 78-year-old man who lived alone in a wooden house on the outskirts of Surabaya. His mornings always started the same way: a small cup of tea, a quiet prayer, and a long sigh before facing another day with the little he had in his pocket. His health no longer kept up with his body, but his faith remained steady, serving as support in difficult moments. Hassan survived by doing simple tasks for his neighbors, sweeping yards, carrying small bags, watering plants when someone traveled. The money he earned barely paid for medicine, much less full meals. Even so, he never complained. He walked slowly through the narrow streets, always repeating the same phrase whenever someone asked how he was doing: "Allah still gives me strength." On that hot day, he decided to go to the market earlier, hoping to find discounted fruit or bread, as sometimes happened when vendors noticed his need. With the crumpled bill in his pocket and his stomach empty since the night before, Hassan walked toward the center with genuine hope of finding a little kindness. The market was crowded, sellers shouted prices, motorcycles passed by kicking up dust, and the sun reflected off the metal stalls. Even with all the commotion, Hassan kept his calm gaze, searching for something cheap enough to ease his hunger without emptying his pocket completely. He didn't know that on that morning his search for a piece of bread would set in motion something no one could explain. Not merchants, not tourists, not officials. Something that would turn that noisy market into the stage for a lesson no one would forget anytime soon. The humid heat intensified as Hassan reached the center of Surabaya. With each step, the air felt heavier, filled with mixed aromas: fresh fish, crushed peppers, freshly cooked rice, and food sizzling in hot oil. The market pulsed like a living organism, with voices overlapping in quick offers and rushed bargaining. It was a continuous, almost hypnotic sound that enveloped anyone who walked through those narrow aisles. Hassan walked carefully to avoid being pushed by the hurried crowd. His trembling hands held the crumpled bill he had saved to buy something simple. Worn as it was, he kept it like a small treasure, enough maybe for a piece of bread or a few bananas. He discreetly wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked around, searching for a stall where the prices seemed more affordable. Then he spotted a vendor known for selling a variety of ready-made foods and fresh bread. The stall was packed, with customers squeezing together to choose cakes, sweets, and pastries. On the metal structure, trays gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting small golden points across the ground. The line moved quickly, but the hurried atmosphere revealed a growing impatience. Some customers whispered to each other, complaining about the heat, the wait, the slow pace of those around them. Hassan took a deep breath, adjusted his simple shirt, and approached with short steps. As soon as he entered the line, he felt some eyes turn toward him. They weren't looks of curiosity, but of irritation. A man behind him muttered, low enough to sound indirect but loud enough to be heard, "If he comes with coins again, this is going to take forever." A woman ahead glanced at the elderly man and turned back, pressing her lips together as if counting the seconds. Hassan kept his eyes on the ground, trying to ignore the impatience around him. His shoulders loosened for a moment, but he forced a small smile, determined to complete his purchase. The merchant, a sturdy man with a flour-stained apron, moved quickly. He grabbed packages, shouted prices, and shoved change into customers' hands. With every sale, his face showed more hurry than courtesy. When his eyes met Hassan's, his expression hardened immediately, as if the old man's presence were an inconvenience. Hassan lifted the crumpled bill carefully as he approached the stall. "Sir, could you sell me a piece of bread, please?" The merchant let out an audible sigh, long and loaded with disdain. "Hurry up, old man. The line can't stop." The impatience of the other customers increased. One of them grumbled, always getting in the way. Even avoiding eye contact, Hassan felt the weight of those words. But he stood there, steady, trying to believe he could still find respect in a place as noisy as it was indifferent. None of those people imagined that the next few minutes would make the entire market stop. Not because of Hassan, but because of something much bigger than any purchase, any line, or any human impatience. When his turn finally came, Hassan raised the bill carefully, as if handing over something too precious to lose. The merchant grabbed the money quickly without looking at the elderly man, simply dropped the bread on the counter, and extended his hand to the next customer, as if the sale were finished. Hassan stood still, confused. "Sir, my change." The merchant turned his face slowly, narrowing his eyes with impatience. "What change?" "I gave more than the price of the bread." "So what?" The vendor cut him off with a crooked smile. "Old folks like you love pretending you forgot the price. Think I don't know that trick?" Some people nearby heard the comment and moved closer. A woman murmured to her friend, "He's accusing the old man of lying." Hassan stepped back, frightened. "I'm not lying, sir. I just need what's mine." The merchant laughed loud enough for the entire line to hear. "Hunger doesn't give you the right to make up stories, my friend." Tourists walking through the aisle stretched their necks to see the scene. One of them raised a phone, ready to record. The red camera light blinked, attracting even more attention. The atmosphere grew tense, as if everyone were waiting for the next word. Hassan tried to explain again. "I just want to eat. The change, please." The merchant took a step forward, lifted his arm, and pushed the old man's hand away. The gesture was quick, harsh, humiliating. The bread nearly fell from the counter, and the crumpled bill slipped from Hassan's fingers. He bent down slowly to pick it up, while the improvised crowd watched in uncomfortable silence. Even the sounds of the market seemed to fade, as if the entire place had held its breath. A tourist whispered, "Why did he do that?" Another replied with growing indignation, "Because he knows the elderly man won't fight back." The vendor crossed his arms, puffing out his chest in a display of false authority. "If you don't have enough money, leave. I'm not going to argue." The cruelty of his words fell like stones. Some people looked away to avoid the scene. Others stayed where they were, trapped between outrage and curiosity. Hassan held the bread with both hands, trying to keep his voice from breaking. "I paid correctly, Allah knows." When he heard the divine name, the merchant let out a muffled laugh filled with contempt. "Leave God out of this. I'm the one who decides here." The sentence echoed louder than the seller intended. The silence that filled the space was not normal, not natural, not human. It was as if something invisible, deep, absolute, had listened. And in that instant, before anyone realized it, the entire market began to notice subtle, unsettling signs around them. The market was still crowded, but suddenly the movement lost its natural rhythm. A strange breeze swept through the main walkway, even though the air had been heavy and humid just minutes earlier. The tarps over the stalls, built to withstand rain and heat, began to vibrate as if someone were running underneath them, but no one was there. The vendors looked up at the same time, instinctively. "Did you feel that?" murmured a man who sold spices, adjusting the glass jars that had shaken on their own. The woman beside him replied, uneasy, "The air feels different." A bird perched on the metal frame flinched and took off, beating its wings so hard that it knocked dry leaves off the covering. The movement made some people lift their hands to shield their faces. The bird vanished between the rooftops, as if fleeing from something no one else could see. Moments later, a metallic sound echoed through the corridor. Not loud, but deep, like an old structure being pressed from within. The neighboring vendor widened his eyes. "That came from the ceiling," he said, staring at the rusted beams supporting the roof over the oldest stalls. Hassan said nothing. He held his bread carefully, as if preserving the last piece of his dignity. Meanwhile, the merchant who had humiliated him laughed, tossing coins back into the drawer in an exaggerated display of control. But even he stopped laughing when another sudden gust lifted dust from the floor. The tourist who had been recording the argument now aimed their cameras upward. A woman commented, squeezing her husband's arm, "This isn't normal. It wasn't windy like this." The hanging lamps began to swing slightly, emitting faint flickers of light. "Is the power failing?" asked a young man, staring at the cable swaying directly above his head. "No," replied an electrician who worked at a hardware stall. "This isn't a power issue. It's vibration." As soon as he said the word, the environment seemed to react by itself. A sharp sound rolled through the metal beams, echoing across the steel stalls. It wasn't strong enough to cause fear, but unexpected enough for everyone to exchange tense looks. The older folks began whispering among themselves. "It could be a warning," said a woman wearing a colorful scarf, looking up at the cloudy sky. "A warning of what?" asked a tourist. She raised an eyebrow as if the answer were too obvious to explain. The tension spreading through the market seemed to take on a life of its own. Even the arrogant merchant stepped back, looking at the metal bar holding up his stall. "These things never shook like this," he admitted in a low voice, trying to hide the unease in his eyes. Hassan breathed slowly, staring at the ground. His posture remained calm, but his silence contrasted sharply with the growing panic around him. The way he remained still, unmoving in the chaos, created such a stark contrast that it drew attention and fueled the sense that something greater was unfolding. A fruit vendor pointed upward. "Look, that part up there. It looks like it's moving by itself." The metal sheet was indeed shifting, not pushed by the wind, but pulled by some internal force. It was as if it were breathing, as if it were reacting, as if it understood. Little by little, footsteps slowed, voices softened, and the entire market sank into a heavy silence, the kind of silence that comes before transformations no one can avoid. A strange atmosphere settled in. It wasn't fear, it wasn't coincidence, it was expectation, and everyone sensed, even without understanding, that something was about to happen. The heavy mood lingering over the market caught the attention of people who had been watching from a distance. Some stepped closer, driven by the feeling that the scene between the merchant and the elderly man wouldn't simply end there. Solidarity began to show in the timid eyes that had once only looked on with curiosity. A woman in a light veil, used to selling medicinal herbs at the market entrance, took 2 steps forward. She held her small shopping bag against her chest and said, her voice firm enough for several people to hear, "He didn't ask for anything that wasn't his. It's not right to treat him this way." Her words echoed between the stalls, stirring murmurs of agreement. A fisherman stacking boxes of ice added, "I saw him give the bill. There's change, yes." These comments sparked a new kind of attention. The crowd, once scattered, began forming a semicircle around the scene. The merchant tried to maintain a superior expression, but his eyes revealed growing discomfort. A young woman holding a phone started recording, not for sensationalism, but out of indignation. "This needs to be recorded," she murmured, adjusting the focus. The gesture encouraged others to do the same. Small red lights, signals from recording cameras, appeared everywhere, glowing like quiet embers, fueling the tension. Meanwhile, near the stall beside them, a young man installing electronic equipment rushed to an old monitor used to check security cameras. He typed quickly, features tense. "Let me see if our camera caught the scene," he said, pressing the buttons. The stall supervisor approached him. "Can you rewind a few minutes?" "Yes, I just need to adjust this." The screen showed scrambled images for a moment, until the video returned to clarity. There it was, the elderly man handing the bill to the merchant, clearly paying the correct amount. A series of faces appeared behind them, customers, vendors, tourists, all trying to see what was happening on the monitor. "Look," one of the young men exclaimed. The video showed exactly what the old man had said. "He didn't ask for anything extra. He paid properly," someone commented. While several people tried to understand what was happening above, Hassan remained in the same spot, motionless and silent. He held the bread with both hands as if it were a gift he didn't deserve. His lips moved subtly, almost imperceptibly, uttering something only a few could hear. The woman closest to him leaned in slightly. "Sir, what are you saying?" Hassan opened his eyes slowly. His voice came out low, so soft it seemed to float with the dust suspended in the air. "Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil." The phrase hung in the air like an invisible echo. The woman felt a sudden chill run up her spine. "He's asking for protection," she said, touching her chest with respect. The merchant, hearing part of the supplication, rolled his eyes. "Now he's going to start reciting things. It doesn't change anything. The change is mine." Several people reacted with indignation. "This is cruelty," said a tourist in English, quickly translated by someone nearby. "You're wrong," added the fisherman, folding his arms. On the monitor, the recording kept playing, capturing not only the moment of refusal, but also the exact instant when the tarp vibrated for the first time. The young man in charge of the cameras widened his eyes. "There's something else happening here." The supervisor frowned. "What do you mean?" The young man paused the image and zoomed in. A section of the metal structure was shaking even before the second gust of wind, and no one had touched it. "This isn't normal," he said, turning up the volume. A faint, metallic, deep sound could be heard, the same one several people had already felt vibrating through their feet. The open loops appeared before the crowd. Why did the structure shake without enough wind? Why had the camera captured an independent movement? And why did everything start right after the humiliation? A collective feeling spread through the market. Something was being revealed, and no one could ignore it. The air seemed to hold its next step, its next sound, its next impact, and everyone was about to discover that the initial tremor was only the beginning. The conversations around them grew like small waves. People who had only watched from afar now moved toward the young man with the cameras, forming a group focused on what was showing on the screen. The monitor replayed the recording clearly. The exact moment Hassan handed over the full bill, the merchant received it, put the money away, and deliberately withheld the change. A middle-aged man, an old resident of the neighborhood, pointed to the video. "There, go back just a bit." The young man obeyed. "This part? Yes, pause now." The image froze at the moment the merchant pocketed the money. The elderly man wasn't holding anything yet, neither the bread nor any coins. The proof was undeniable. A woman with a colorful backpack placed her hand over her mouth, shocked. He lied. He really lied to the old man. The fisherman who had defended Hassan folded his arms, completely outraged. And he still humiliated him in front of everyone. As more people gathered to watch the recording, the merchant began to sweat. The hot air made drops run down the sides of his face, but there was another kind of heat, the kind born from exposure. He looked around as if searching for support in the crowd, but found only hard, disappointed stares. This could be edited, he tried, attempting to salvage his image. The young man handling the cameras chuckled. "Edited? This footage is live." "The camera doesn't even have a cutting function, sir." Another voice rose from the group, heavy with frustration. "I suspected him before. Once my change came up short, too." That statement caused immediate murmurs. A woman raised her hand. "Same with me. He said I was counting wrong." A young peanut vendor approached, exasperated. "He's been doing this for months. I never had the courage to complain." As if a floodgate had opened, more testimonies appeared. People who had held on to small grievances for a long time finally found the courage to speak up in front of the undeniable proof on the screen. The merchant's face grew even more tense. "You're exaggerating. Everyone here knows I work hard." "Working hard doesn't justify deceiving people," replied the woman recording the scene. She brought her phone even closer, capturing every detail of his reaction. The noise around them grew. It was no longer the chaotic sound of the market. It was the collective voice of indignation. Injustice had been exposed. And at the center of it all stood the elderly man, silent, holding the bread in his hands as if he didn't want to burden anyone with the weight of the moment. The young man with the cameras gathered courage and enlarged the footage again, this time focusing on the exact moment the merchant pushed the old man's hand away. The image sharpened. The harsh gesture, the disdain, the refusal to return what was owed. The crowd reacted all at once. Unacceptable. What a shame. He should apologize right now. A local resident who had been watching from afar stepped forward and added, "That man has done this even to children. I've seen it. He never tells the real price." With every testimony, the moral circle tightened. The cook who worked at the sweets stall watching closely spoke calmly. "Injustice always comes to light, sooner or later." The merchant tried to retreat behind his counter, as if the table could shield him. But the crowd didn't want violence. They wanted truth. And the truth was there in the images, in the words, in the eyes. Hassan remained silent, but his expression did not carry anger. It carried only weariness, the weariness of someone who has long fought silently against the harshness of life. The woman who had been filming lowered her phone for a moment and looked at him. "Sir, what do you want to happen now?" Hassan lifted his eyes slowly, took a deep breath and answered with a fragile yet steady voice, "Allah sees everything. The rest is not mine to decide." The response struck the people around him like a deep reminder of humility, and while the crowd absorbed those words, a new metallic vibration echoed above them, this time stronger, clearer, closer, a silent warning that the outcome was approaching, and no one was prepared for what would follow. The revelation from the recording did not end the conflict. It only intensified it. The group gathered around the stall still murmured, weighing the situation with growing indignation. The heat felt even heavier, and the charged atmosphere reflected a mix of outrage and anticipation. The metal structure above vibrated lightly, but no one looked upward now. All their attention was fixed on the merchant's posture and the elderly man's surprising calmness. The fisherman raised his voice first. "You saw the recording. Give the man his change back." A neighborhood resident reinforced it. "End this before it gets worse." Everyone saw what happened. The merchant, cornered by a wall of furious stares, drew a deep breath and crossed his arms in a forced attempt to regain control. I don't owe him anything. That video could be wrong. And these people just want to tear me down. The crowd reacted immediately. Liar! Own your mistake! Stop this! Even so, he doubled down on his arrogance. You really think I'm going to bow to some lying old man? He's pretending to be poor to squeeze coins out of me. I didn't do anything wrong. The words fell like stones in the already tense environment. The woman filming trembled with indignation. How can you say that after everything we just saw he paid? You pushed his hand away. The merchant hesitated but continued. You're all exaggerating. It was just a misunderstanding. The young man from the camera stall, once timid, stepped forward. You've deceived plenty of people, and now you want to lie in front of everyone? The silence that followed was brutal. It wasn't the ordinary momentary pause of a busy market. It was a silence charged with energy, as if every person there had held their breath at the same time, and at the center of it all stood Hassan, motionless, still holding the bread, his breathing calm, his eyes lowered. While the crowd demanded justice, he seemed to withdraw inward, sheltered in a faith no one else could reach. The herbalist woman stepped closer to him. Sir, would you like to say something? The elderly man slowly lifted his face. There was no anger, no fear, no desperation, only quiet resignation, the serenity of someone who knows the struggle against injustice well, yet chooses dignity over impulse. His lips moved again, this time with more clarity. His fragile voice emerged like a thin line of light cutting through the tension. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. The phrase expanded through the corridor, touching people who didn't even understand its meaning. It felt as if the sound carried its own spiritual weight, a reminder that help exists beyond what the eyes can see. The woman filming took a deep breath, shaken. The fisherman lowered his head in respect. Even some children playing near the fruit stalls stopped, as if sensing something they couldn't name. The merchant, on the other hand, paled slightly. What is he saying? He asked, trying to keep his tone firm. A man behind him replied, He's placing the situation in God's hands. The statement seemed to slice through the merchant's confidence. He stepped back, as if his own stall no longer felt like a safe shelter. But still, he tried to resist. This is fanaticism. I don't want religious speeches here. The pastry chef approached slowly. This isn't fanaticism, it's faith, something you should respect, especially after what you did. The merchant opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Perhaps from fear, perhaps from shame, or perhaps from an ancient instinct that recognizes when an invisible force begins to move. The wind returned, not strong, but heavy, as if pushing the air into the market. The tarp vibrated again. The metal made a high, sharp crack clearer this time. People looked up uneasy. The merchant finally did the same. The tension had reached its limit. Something in the air warned, silently, that arrogance would not stand much longer, and the next moment would decide the fate of everyone there. A sharp crack ran through the market, as if coming from inside the metal, not from the wind. People stopped what they were doing and looked up at once, searching for the source of the noise. The ground seemed to vibrate for a second, not enough to cause panic, but enough to alert even the most distracted. A young fruit seller swallowed hard. That came from his shop, he murmured, pointing toward the merchant's stall. The merchant, who minutes earlier defended his lie with confidence, stepped back twice. His eyes scanned the metal frame above his own stall, watching the rusted bars sway lightly. The sound repeated, deeper this time, like a final warning. The crowd instinctively backed away, creating space. The entire market seemed to hold its breath. An absolute silence filled the aisle. Then it happened. A crash, loud enough to echo through the market posts, shattered the silence. The metal structure of the merchant's shop collapsed all at once, as if the bolts had loosened simultaneously. The bars fell inward, crushing boxes, knocking down shelves, shattering jars, destroying the cash drawer and all the stock arranged on the counter. It was a collapse so specific, so precise, it seemed almost targeted. It fell only there, exactly where the merchant had humiliated the elderly man. People screamed, but the shock quickly shifted to astonishment when they realized something extraordinary. No one had been hurt. The collapse fell inward, not outward. The customers were far from danger. The merchant, who had stepped back just moments earlier, escaped by the smallest margin, almost as if an instinct he didn't understand had pushed him away. The woman recording lifted her phone again, hands trembling. My God! This just happened! The fisherman stepped closer, staring at the wreckage. It collapsed out of nowhere. he said, his voice muffled by disbelief. The young man from the camera stall was already tapping frantically on his phone. "This is going to spread across the country," he said, eyes wide. The merchant, stunned, placed his hands on his head. "My shop, my products, everything." But no one responded with pity. The crowd only watched in silence, trying to understand the almost surgical precision of the collapse. A single piece of metal had fallen exactly onto the cash drawer, crushing it completely, as if an invisible hammer had chosen its target. The herbalist woman stepped closer with care. "When injustice becomes too heavy, the scales move," she said softly. In the corner, Hassan remained still, without any exaggerated reaction. He held the bread with the same serene posture, as if all that noise could not touch his inner state. He only murmured, "Allah is just." Raised phones recorded everything. The merchant in shock, the debris scattered across the floor, the dust still floating in the air, and the elderly man looking down with an astonishing calmness. Within minutes, videos began circulating in local groups. In less than an hour, the footage was spreading across Indonesia, and before the end of the afternoon, the scene went viral in multiple countries with different captions. "The collapse no one can explain. Miracle or coincidence? The price of injustice." But there, before the settling dust, no one needed labels. Everyone knew, even those unwilling to admit it out loud, that the collapse wasn't just a structural failure. It was a period placed exactly where the lie had begun. The dust was still hanging in the air when the residents began returning to their spots, now with an entirely different look in their eyes. The scene had transformed the environment. It was no longer just a busy market, but a moment of collective reflection. The sudden collapse carried a spiritual weight no one dared to dismiss. A woman holding bags of vegetables approached Hassan with respect. "This wasn't by chance, sir. It was a sign," she said softly. Other vendors, once too busy to pay attention, left their stalls and formed a circle around the elderly man. Some shook their heads, impressed. Others whispered blessings. It was clear the community had understood the message. The fisherman, always direct, raised his hand for silence and declared, "Allah protects those who are wronged." Everyone saw what happened here. People nodded, some even with tears. The woman who had been filming put away her phone and approached the old man. "We're sorry for letting this happen earlier. You didn't deserve any of it." Shortly after, the local community leader, a man known for his balanced demeanor, arrived after being called by one of the vendors. He walked up to Hassan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "My brother, you honor this market with your patience. What we saw today will be remembered." Everyone stepped aside when the merchant, still stunned, approached. His steps were short, hesitant, and his face revealed a mix of shame and fear. He stopped before the elderly man, unable to meet his eyes for more than a second. He began, but his voice faltered. He took a breath, trying to compose himself. "I was wrong. I deceived you. I humiliated you. And Allah knows I should never have done that." The words came out like a painful confession. No one moved. Everyone waited. The elderly man lowered his head slightly, without pride, without anger, without vengeance. "Forgiveness belongs to the one who chooses to offer it," he said calmly. At that moment, the young man from the camera stall reappeared, holding the portable monitor. "Look at this." He pressed play. The screen showed clearly that during the crash, only the merchant's stall had shaken. The stalls beside it remained completely still. A collective shiver ran through the group. The meaning didn't need to be spoken aloud. The community had already understood. The collapse wasn't a coincidence. It was justice, witnessed by all. The next day dawned differently in the Surabaya market. There was no official announcement, no scheduled meeting, yet everyone seemed to wake with the same intention. The environment, once marked by hurry and indifference, now carried an atmosphere of collective care, as if the incident had planted something quiet in the heart of every vendor. The first change came early. The woman from the medicinal herb stall saw Hassan walking slowly between the booths and waved with a gentle smile. "Come here, sir. Today the tea is on me." She prepared a warm cup, scented with ginger and honey, and handed it to him with a kind gesture that drew a shy thank you from the elderly man. A little farther ahead, the fisherman opened a styrofoam box and offered a small, carefully wrapped package. "Take this home." It's simple, but it was prepared with respect. Other stalls followed the example. Fruits, bread, seasoned rice, portions that might seem small on their own, but together represented something profound. The elderly man no longer walked alone. The vendors, moved by what they had witnessed, gathered informally and decided to create a small community fund to help those in greater need, starting with Hassan. The box where they placed their contributions stayed in the center of the market, visible to everyone, as a daily reminder that generosity builds stronger bonds than any financial transaction. As for the merchant responsible for the injustice, his attitude had changed. He no longer raised his voice, rushed customers, or tried to manipulate prices. He was seen sweeping the remains of his former stall and, with the help of locals, collecting every piece of the fallen structure. "I want to rebuild it the right way this time," he said, holding a bent screw between his fingers, and for the first time since the incident, he approached Hassan with visible sincerity. "If you allow it, I can help with whatever you need from now on." There was no speech, no performance. The transformation was genuine, visible in his simple gestures, in his newfound humility, in the way he stayed quiet to listen. With the passing days, the market came to be remembered not for the collapse but for what followed, a place where care defeated greed, where kindness guided daily life, and where an elderly man once invisible gained respect, welcome, and a voice. When the next morning rose over Surabaya, the market felt entirely different. Soft light spread across the freshly arranged stalls, revealing a calmer atmosphere than usual. Vendors spoke quietly, as if the space itself had learned to honor what it had witnessed. Nothing shouted, nothing rushed. It was as if the dawn carried the silent memory that divine justice never fails. Hassan walked slowly, noticing the kind faces that now greeted him. Each smile carried a simple yet powerful message. Dignity is never lost when someone tries to humiliate it. It merely waits for the right moment to be restored. And in that place, restoration meant transformed hearts, corrected wrongs, and renewed awareness that no act of cruelty goes unnoticed by Allah. This story left a deep mark, not only on the market, but on everyone who heard it. Because there is a principle that never changes. Injustice may raise its voice, but truth always finds a way to answer. Sometimes that answer comes quietly, other times, through events no human being can control. And it reminds us that life watches, weighs, and returns, always at the perfect time. If this account touched your heart, let it be more than a memory. Let it serve as a reminder that every act of kindness builds something eternal, while every selfish choice pulls us away from what truly matters. The world changes when we change our attitudes, and each day is a new chance to act with sincerity and courage. Now, keep walking with me. Watch the next video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming stories of faith and perseverance.